Recording? Okay. Right, another dilemma. Currently, my code is a bit mad. What it does is all of the stuff that decides what to annotate and where to tell you where to go next for your objective is all on the enemy object. Pretty much all on the enemy object, because usually it does involve an enemy, a target you're trying to assassinate or knock out, and the enemy is the thing that knows the most, has the most data already stored on it about, like, am I conscious, am I being carried, what ship am I aboard, and that is what determines what your objective is. If the enemy is still walking around his ship, your objective is to take him out. If he's lying on the ground, your objective is to pick him up. If you're carrying him, then your objective is to take him back to your pod, unless you're on a station, in which case it's to take him to a drop point, and if you drop him at a drop point, then he should detect that and disappear. Now that I'm adding stealing missions, of course, that means that those missions don't have any annotations because all that code is on an enemy, and there is no enemy involved in that mission. There are enemies aboard the ship, but they're not the objective. And so really that feels like that code shouldn't be on the enemy object, because it's not necessarily an enemy that you're going to be... This is all mission stuff, and so it doesn't feel like it relates to the enemy object. It doesn't feel like it belongs... It doesn't feel like that code should live there. We do have to know all that stuff about the enemy object. If the objective is an enemy, we need to know that stuff about, is it conscious, what ship is it aboard? And so what my puzzle now is, like, where does all the logic go? It feels like it should go on the mission object. I pretty much already decided that the mission object will always be the thing that's drawing the annotation, so it'll be in the mission object's draw GUI event that the annotation actually happens. And if it's supposed to be pointing to an enemy, the mission object will move itself to the enemy's position and then annotate itself. That is easy. The trickier part is all this logic about how does it decide what the annotation should say and where should it go. That's all currently on the enemy object, and if I move it off, that's fine, but then it's got to refer to the enemy object. And to do that, it's got to know that the objective is an enemy. So on the mission object, it'll have to have a check to say, is the object index of the objective? The fact that the word object and the word objective are very similar gets very confusing here. Is the type of the objective an enemy? And if so, then start looking at all this detailed logic about its unconscious and its current state and things. If you try to check those things on a non-enemy objective, obviously it will crash because that objective doesn't have those variables. So I guess my hesitance is, like, does it feel weird to put all this very enemy-specific logic into the mission object? Or should that logic stay on the enemy object, but only be used to determine what the annotation says, and then the mission draw GUI event is pretty general and just says whatever the objective is, ask it what its annotation text is, and then display it? That sounds good. The only issue is, now that I'm looking at this logic does a bunch of other things, like displays the complete mission thing, and destroys the enemy when it's delivered. You know, it goes into this drop-off point and then the object itself kind of vanishes. It also was annotating the agent drop point, which is maybe a weird thing for it to be doing. That definitely feels like... yeah. So we need to look at some things about the enemy to know whether to annotate the enemy itself or whether to annotate the agent drop point instead. I think I could simplify that and just say, look, for as long as the enemy exists and is your objective, it'll always have an annotation. And if that means sometimes there's two annotations, there's one to the enemy saying carry to the drop point, and there's one on the drop point saying this is the drop point, that would be fine, I think. That would be pretty clear. So the enemy can just sit there and use all this logic. I think I want the objective itself to calculate what its annotation should say. Maybe I move it all to the mission object, and then the mission GUI, mission draw GUI event would look like, is my objective an enemy? If so, look at its state, look at what ship it's aboard, and annotate and figure out what the text should be, and then draw that text on myself, because I will also be at the objective's location. the advantage of that is that all the logic to do with that is now would then be in one place, which seems kind of good. Yeah, and that would give me the flexibility to stop annotating an objective during a mission. I don't totally know if I need to do that, but that's certainly what I currently do. So my only hesitance is that it means the mission object now sort of knows and assumes a whole bunch of stuff about how the enemy object works. So the only drawback to keeping, if I let the enemy decide what this objective annotation text is, and the mission object just draws it, that feels nicely compartmentalized. The sort of the code, each bit of code is on the object that it needs to know about, and they're just I'm struggling for the words for it because I don't have the education on this, but it feels kind of clean for it to just communicate just a single string to the mission object. It minimizes the communication between the two. This is encapsulation, isn't it? I don't know. Minimizes how much the two objects need to know about each other. And that sounds good. But my hesitance is that aren't I going to end up with a huge amount of replicated logic? Because all this stuff that is determining what the annotation says also does hard game logic stuff about should we destroy ourselves, we've got a bunch of exit statements here which I have to get rid of, that's awful. It does a bunch of work as well as deciding what the annotation is. So I guess stuff like this complete mission thing, that feels like it should be on the mission object, right? It feels like that should be a thing that the mission object itself does, not the enemy. But the logic for it depends upon variables about the enemy, which are specific to that enemy. So in order to move that logic to the mission object, I would have to make the mission object know and assume things about how the enemy object works. The alternative would be to leave this logic here, but instead of actually calling the complete mission thing, we just sort of set our objective text to be some special value that then the mission object reads in and says, oh, it doesn't actually want me to display this text, it wants me to complete the mission. I don't love that. Look at this. This is body delivered. Objective seems to be alive, but we can fix that. These are really specific references to things that are going on the enemy object, and they are being passed straight to this complete mission script. I don't see a great way to separate those. It's like I could try and double up the objective text and give it special values there. I don't think I can do that actually, because the special values would have to be the actual words body delivered, or some sort of code that the mission object would then interpret and I suppose, so I think I'd need, if I wanted to keep them separate, I would have to pass it. I'd reuse objective text for this, so the mission complete text would set the objective text to be whatever we want the mission complete text to be, and then we would we'd have another variable that tells the mission, hey, we've completed the mission, and it gets messy because it also wants to destroy itself. The enemy wants to destroy itself. It's being put into the agent drop. It needs to no longer exist, and if the mission object is trying to read data from it at that point, that's terrible. Complete mission. Is there a reason that needs to be called by the mission object? There isn't really. We already call it from all over the place. The logic that determines whether you've completed the mission would be on each of the possible object types that a mission objective can be, rather than being on the mission object. That sounds wrong, doesn't it? Feels like the mission object should be the thing that manages whether you've completed the mission or not and determines it. But to know what to say about it, we need to know things about the enemy, if it is an enemy. And if it's not an enemy, we don't. For items, there aren't going to be this sort of mess of different states and conditions. Don't feel that close to a solution here. Right now, the mission object never does any detection on whether it's complete. In fact, I think I just recently added some more logic to the agent drop that completes the mission. Yeah, I think those are just going to be everywhere. I don't think there's a way to keep them all on the mission object. It could, I mean, this script, if I wanted to refactor this, I could change the script so that instead of actually completing the mission, it just sends the mission object a message saying, yes, we're complete, here's the message to display. And that's basically what it does do, isn't it? Yeah, it does do that. Like, this is kind of what it... I mean, no, it does directly show updates and do a bunch of work itself. It isn't just telling the mission object to do this work. It does do this work. In fact, the player does this work, strangely, which makes a certain amount of sense. It's got to modify the player's money values and things like that. Yeah, this is the compromise we're going to have to go with, is complete mission can be called from anywhere. The enemy object will call it from here, and it will set its objective text, and then the mission object's draw GUI, all it will do is say, does the objective exist? If it does, read in its objective text. Everything that can be an objective has to have an objective text variable, and we will make sure that's true. And show that as an annotation on the objective. If it doesn't exist, we label the ship that it's aboard, if that exists. If that doesn't exist, then something's gone terribly wrong. And that would be it. Like, the mission object wouldn't have to know anything about the state of the objective. It doesn't have to know what phase of the mission you're on, strangely. It just needs to know if it's complete or not, or complete or failed or ongoing. Those are the three states a mission could be in. And if it is complete or it's failed, actually the mission object destroys itself at that point. It tells you something and then destroys itself. And that seems good. That means one of the objects in this mess is at least very simple. The other object is still going to be complex, but it won't be annotating itself. And then right now, like the current system, it has this awful kind of a confusion of responsibilities where the enemy object and the mission object are always trying to tell each other, oh, I'm displaying the annotation now, so you shouldn't do it. Oh, no, I'm displaying it now, so you shouldn't do it. And that's gone wrong lots of times, as you can imagine. Okay, logic's going to stay on the enemy object, but it's going to restrict what it actually displays. All of this is in the GUI event, so actually I'll move all this to the step event, I think. And I don't love this. Objective type. Yeah, that's what we use to signify whether it is an objective or not, because if it's just a regular enemy, we don't do anything. And whether it has an attached mission. I'll leave that as is, it works. Yeah, alright, that's what I'm going to do.